Welcome to the Horror with Marchese and Buller show. If you're tuning in, thank you. If you don't want to listen to the technical stuff we're going to speak about, you can always fast forward to the end and watch the bloopers if you want to see some comedy. Sometimes we don't talk just about writing, sometimes we talk about movies, books, things like that. So let us know what you like. Let us know if we're doing something that's maybe not so great, and we'll try to fix it for the next videos. I'm William Marchese, and this is Gary Buller.
Hello.
And today, we're going to talk about killing your darlings, as Stephen King puts it, when you write. Do you write stories and toss them aside, or do you cherish each as though they're your one and only? Some you hold close to you, you don't want anybody to see them because you think maybe they'll take the idea. Some you just pour out onto the page and you just throw it away to the side. What do you know when to kill your darlings? Maybe you wrote a really great scene and you don't want to part with it, but then you know that it has to go because maybe it doesn't work for the story. Maybe you could use it for another story. What do you do when you know that you have to take something out of your story that you really love?
I suppose killing your darlings can refer to a few different things. You sort of touched on the wider implication of sometimes you write an entire story and that story might not necessarily be good enough. When Stephen King sort of referenced it, as you sort of correctly moved on to, he was referencing scenes and smaller parts of the story, and you've been willing to get rid of scenes, smaller parts of what you're writing. In answer to your sort of opening question about how do you treat your stories, every story I write, until probably the moment I finished it, is my favourite. I am a little bit precious about them, and I don't know whether or not that's not a good or a bad thing. Yeah, I like to invest a lot of time into a story as opposed to just throwing them out there. I know people, friends and so on and so forth, who write, who they're just throwing stories out every day. It's just like boom, 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 boom. And the way I sort of look at it is it's not a production line. When I write a story, I care a lot about it. I like to make sure that what I'm putting out there is of a high standard for me. And I like to put stuff out there that I'd want to read. So yeah, I definitely I invest everything goes into the story, and that's my favourite for the moment I'm writing it. But saying that, if it comes to a point where I have to delete a scene or delete a character or delete something that just doesn't work, I can quite easily do that because I always save older versions of what I'm doing anyway. So if I take something out and then I'm thinking, oh my goodness, that was actually quite good and that was pertinent to something later on, I can always put it back in there. It's the technology these days. It's not like you've got a typewriter or something; you just have to put a big line through it.
But that's a perfect example. So for instance, you said everything you write is your darling. So what if you come to a point where you have to take that out? You have to take some scene out that just won't work. It's just too much for that story part, and it just doesn't make sense. Like there's redundant. What would you do? Like how do you go about that?
I literally just remove it. Physically, what I do, I highlight it, usually in red. When I go back through the story, I'll reread it and reassess it, and then if it needs removing, I'll just delete it out.
Yeah.
Straight away. I don't have a problem doing that. Do
you put it on the side if it's something that you may be able to use later on?
Yeah, like I said, I keep an older version, so I'm not afraid to delete. What I do is I highlight the things I'm not sure about in red, and I'll save an updated version of it, and then I'll go through it again and make the stuff that's in red. If it's not needed, it'll go. It's a perfect example is this thing we've been working on recently, Flash piece, 700 words.
Yeah,
I've deleted paragraphs out of that will never see the light of day, and those paragraphs took the story in different directions. You just do it. But whilst I was writing that story, of course I'm precious about it. It's something you're investing a lot of time into.
Yeah. So how many stories do you write before one sticks?
What do you mean exactly?
So sometimes I'll write a story and I'll get halfway through and I'll say this is not so great. I'll put it aside, start another one. Sometimes I'll go back to that other one and just play with it, or sometimes I just put it totally away and then at some later date I'll come back and work on it and I'll say, oh look, that's where I was going with this. How many do you I guess you could call them throwaway stories?
I've had that a lot this past month. As you probably know, I get what you mean now. I've started 3 different stories in the past month. I've got about 1,000, 1,500 Yeah, 1,000 or 1,500 words, sort of laid down, maybe even two. And I was boring myself with my own writing. The story was boring me. I was just like, where am I going to go with this? And it gets to a point where it's too much effort to get to the point where you want to go with it. And you're just like, can I really be bothered creating these situations for this character, because I'm not feeling it at all? And yeah, usually about 1,500, 2,000 words in, I'm like, right, okay, better just put this one aside. And I've got this folder on my G drive. It's called, I can't remember, something like throwaway stories or something. It's just where I've started stories and I've not felt any love for them, and I've just discarded them. I've never finished them and just thrown them in there. Do I ever go back to them? Occasionally, but I find it hard to shake that feeling sometimes when I reach that point. I might use parts of the story for other stories, or an idea for another story, but yeah, they often just stay there and rot.
Yeah, so basically it's the same for me. I have the stories that I just put on the side, and if later on they catch me, or as if I'm looking for an idea, I'll go back to them and I'll say, oh, that's interesting, and maybe I'll just put some other aspect to it, and it'll make some, sort of like a prompt. I guess you could say when people get writer's block, they when they get writer's block, they go to these writing prompts that kind of get them going. Do you give away your throwaway stories sometimes for free? Like, if you have these stories that you like, this is not so great, let me just doctor it up a little bit and give it to this publication, which is not paying, but it's just getting stories out there. You may not look so. I mean, if you're not behind your story, it may not shine enough. But then again, somebody else may like it. You never know. Mm-hmm. Do you want to, at the detriment of making yourself look bad, do you want to just throw stories out there for free that you have waiting on your hard drive, or do you want to get the quality stuff out there?
I think at one point I would have done. I would have thrown it out there anyway. I have done once or twice with stories fairly early in my writing career, gone, yeah, it's not great, but I know this place will accept, stories, and acceptance is an acceptance, get it out there. Nowadays I wouldn't. No, there are stories that are perfectly acceptable that I've got that are finished and good to go, but because I don't feel like they're maybe as good as they should be, they're never going to get out there. So yeah, no, I wouldn't.
Okay. Now, but you said before you might have.
Before, yeah, when I first started, you take any acceptance that comes your way, don't you, really? But now, I don't want stories out there that I go forward. I think there are enough of them out there. If you search hard enough, there are stories that I've written that aren't great. You'll go through, you'll find them online somewhere, and you'll read through them, and they'll be full of grammatical errors and spelling mistakes.
You're right, but you may not like them, but then there may be someone out there that does. It's weird how it works, but then you can always see the mistakes, even in something that's really polished and great. You'll look at it and you're like, oh, let me just put it aside. I read somewhere that no matter how much a writer says it's finished, their story's finished, they always can go back and find something to change. So it's like you have to end it at some point. You have to just say, that's it. I'm not going back to this. It's always an evolution as well. As you keep writing, your next story is going to be better. Your next story, same with YouTube. Your next video is going to be better. It's going to be this and this. It gets elevated to a certain level of quality that you may not have when you first started. But that doesn't mean that your first story isn't. Sometimes people can look at your first stories and pick apart where they can analyze it and they can see, oh, that's where he started doing that little technique that he does now so great, and they can see where things came from and evolved to. So sometimes that's even good too, to put out your old stuff and let people see how you grew, because that can teach you a lot if you know where to look.
Well, you have to start somewhere. Everyone has to start somewhere. You've got to put these things out there in order to grow and progress. So you're always going to have these stories that you're slightly embarrassed by. And what kind of interests me is these bigger writers, the ones that are getting paid to do their work these days. I wonder what happens to some of their older stories. Because surely there are Stephen King stories out there, from years ago, like when he was like 10 or something, that is put out there, in some sort of rag.
There actually was an earlier story from Stephen King that I read. It was in Cemetery Dance, so I guess that's where his first stories, they go. They published them. And like I said, it's interesting to see that how they started. And if you really want to be a writer, you pick up on how to analyze things like that. When you just listen to a little bit of this person's advice, a little bit of that person's advice, and you piece your own thing together, because there's no right or wrong way to do it. What works for you may not work for someone else, but a little piece of what you're doing can help someone else. Even this show, yes. Who knows? Maybe someone will learn something from us. But you also have to know when to end, and that's what we're going to do right now. So if you like this video, please leave us a like, leave us a comment, and subscribe. Check us out next time. On that note, keep writing.
It's all with Marchese and more. It's all with Marchese and more.
Hey! Oh boy. Okay, let's stop this. We're at hashtag amwriting as well, and hashtag writing.
Gary Buller.
Hashtag Gary Buller.
/ finger up.
Oh. Your screen froze. That's why I thought you stopped. Wait, you froze.
Oh, no. Am I back?
Yeah, now you're back. No, sort of like a prompt. I guess you could say when people get writer's block, they they all right. And Gary. Gary. Sorry, man.
Waiting to see if there's some more coming. No, it's okay.
Go to these writing prompts that kind of get them going. What? Okay, I want to know, what is that? Because it's like sparkly and... Oh, the bow. I thought it was...
I was just trying to keep a straight face at the same time, just sort of have this sort of repeatedly, just sort of going around the screen. So. Go all of it though. Censored on pathetic.
Well, no, those bloopers I don't want. There's certain bloopers I can't do. Okay. So this
I've got the dog light literally sort of just off camera, just looking at me.
The dog. The dog. Oh, he's looking at you.
Where is he? He's there. Lucas.
Pooch.
Go on.
Censor.
You need to get a little zoomy on.
Oh God. He's everywhere.
What about zoomy?
He's everywhere.
Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah.